3 ancient faiths, 1 forbidden truth, hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. What if everything you were taught about finding God was leading you in the wrong direction? What if the divine was never meant to be found outside, but awakened within? What if the greatest spiritual secret was never meant to be spoken aloud? There's something deeply unsettling about the Abrahamic traditions. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, they've shaped empires, inspired billions, sparked wars. But underneath the rituals, beneath the prayers, behind the sacred texts, there's a thread, a whisper, a truth so radical that even believers hesitate to name it. Here's what most people miss. These 3 faiths didn't just share prophets and holy cities. They shared an understanding of human consciousness that was systematically buried, not erased, buried, because this understanding threatened the very foundations of religious authority. It suggested that the divine wasn't locked in heaven, guarded by priests and prophets. It suggested something far more dangerous, that divinity was embedded in you. The Torah hints at it in Genesis when it says humanity was created in the image of God, not symbolically, not metaphorically, in the image. Christianity takes it further when Christ declares, "The kingdom of heaven is within you, not coming someday, not reserved for the righteous, within." And the Quran goes even deeper, stating that Allah is closer to you than your jugular vein, closer than your breath, closer than your thoughts. 3 traditions, 3 languages, 3 cultures spanning millennia, all pointing to the exact same revelation. But here's where it gets strange. If this truth was so central, why isn't it taught openly? Why do mystics across all 3 faiths, Kabbalists, Gnostics, Sufis, speak of it in code, in symbols, in parables that only the initiated can decode? Why were so many of them silenced, exiled, or worse? Because this truth doesn't just inspire devotion, it ignites transformation, and transformation can't be controlled. When people discover they carry the sacred within themselves, they stop depending on institutions to access it. They stop waiting for permission to experience the divine. They become sovereign in their spiritual journey, and that threatens every power structure built on religious authority. The early church fathers knew this. Islamic scholars knew this. Rabbinic authorities knew this. That's why the mystical teachings were always kept separate from mainstream practice. Not because they were false, but because they were too true, too powerful, too liberating. So they preserved this secret in layers, in symbols, in teachings passed from master to student, in whispered conversations, in texts written in coded language that only those with eyes to see could understand. The truth was never destroyed. It was hidden in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to look. The question isn't whether this secret exists. The question is, what happens when you stop searching for God out there and start remembering the presence that's been waiting inside you all along? Why religious institutions feared this truth more than heresy. Power structures don't collapse from external attacks. They crumble from within when people stop needing intermediaries. And that's exactly what this secret does. It removes the middleman. It says you don't need a temple to access the sacred. You don't need a priest to translate divine will. You don't need permission to experience transcendence. You already carry everything required. This terrified authorities for centuries. The Catholic Church condemned the Gnostics who taught that direct knowledge of God was every person's birthright. They burned their texts, erased their names from history. Why? Because the Gnostics were saying something dangerous. Salvation doesn't come from believing the right doctrines. It comes from awakening to your true nature. Islamic orthodoxy persecuted the Sufis who danced in ecstatic union with the divine. They saw these mystics as threats because the Sufis taught that you could experience Allah directly, without scholars interpreting every verse of the Quran for you. The dance, the poetry, the wine, imagery, it was all code for an interior intoxication with the divine that no external authority could regulate. Jewish leadership forced Kabbalists underground when they studied the hidden dimensions of Torah. The mystical teachings spoke of divine emanations flowing through all creation, including human beings. They taught techniques for ascending through spiritual worlds, for uniting with the infinite. And this made the establishment nervous, because if everyone could access these teachings, who would need the rabbis? But here's what almost no one connects. These mystics weren't just teaching theology. They were teaching practice, meditation techniques, breathwork, sacred chanting, contemplation of divine names, methods designed to trigger direct spiritual experience, not belief, but encounter. They knew something that mainstream religion had forgotten. Faith without experience becomes empty ritual. Prayer without presence becomes mechanical repetition. Belief without transformation becomes ideology. And ideology always serves power, never liberation. The institutional religions gave you commandments to obey. The mystics gave you keys to unlock your own consciousness. And those keys lead to doors inside you that most people never knew existed. Doors that open into experiences that can't be controlled, commodified, or contained by any human authority. So the real question becomes, if they feared this truth so much, what exactly happens when someone discovers it? How ancient mystics from different faiths discovered the same inner reality. Picture this: a Jewish Kabbalist in 12th century Spain, a Christian monk in 14th century Germany, and a Sufi master in 13th century Persia. They never met, never read each other's work, lived in different worlds with different languages and different sacred texts. Yet when you read their writings, something impossible emerges. They're describing the same experience, the same journey, the same transformation. They speak of stages. The Jewish mystic talks about ascending through the Sephirot 10 emanations of divine light that connect the infinite to the finite. The Christian monk describes the soul's journey through darkness, detachment, and finally divine union. The Sufi maps the stations of the heart as it surrenders layer by layer, dissolving into absorption with the beloved. Different maps, same territory. And here's what makes this extraordinary. They weren't theorizing, they were reporting. These were explorers of inner space, documenting what they found in the depths of contemplative practice. And what they found was consistent across traditions, across centuries, across cultures. The geography of consciousness, it turns out, is universal. They discovered that beneath the thinking mind, there's a silence. And in that silence, there's a presence. Not an absence, a presence. Not emptiness, fullness. A light that doesn't come from outside, but radiates from a source deeper than memory, older than thought, more intimate than breath. The Kabbalists called it the Ein Sof, the infinite that has no end. Christians called it the ground of being, the Godhead beyond God. Sufis called it the friend, the beloved, the truth that dissolves all lies. But names are just fingers pointing at the moon. What they were all pointing toward was an experience of unity consciousness. But here's the part that changes everything. This wasn't reserved for saints and sages. Every mystic across all three traditions insisted that this awakening was your birthright. Not because you're special, because you're human, because consciousness itself, at its deepest level, is divine. The separation you feel between yourself and the sacred, that's the illusion. Unity is the reality. And the entire spiritual journey is about waking up from the dream of disconnection. The practices were different. The language was different. The cultural context was different. But the destination? Identical. A dissolving of the boundary between self and source. Between creature and creator. Between the seeker and what's being sought. If this resonates, write unity in the comments. And if you're ready to go deeper into these mysteries, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting started. Why this changes everything about your spiritual path. So here's where we land. The secret isn't that God exists. It's that God exists as you. Not in some distant future after you die. Not as a reward for following rules. Right now. In this breath. In this moment. In the consciousness reading these words. This isn't metaphor. This isn't poetic language. This is what the mystics across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam discovered when they went deep enough. That changes the entire game. Prayer isn't begging an external deity for favors, it's communion with your own deepest nature. Sin isn't breaking divine law, it's forgetting who you really are. Salvation isn't escaping hell, it's waking up from the illusion of separation. Worship isn't appeasing an angry God, it's celebrating the miracle of existence itself. But here's the part that most spiritual seekers miss. Knowing this intellectually changes nothing. This isn't philosophy. It's not a belief system you adopt. It's a reality you must experience. And that requires practice, discipline, patience, commitment. The mystics didn't stumble into enlightenment. They cultivated it through years of meditation, prayer, study, and surrender. The Kabbalists spent hours contemplating Hebrew letters until they dissolved into living light. The Christian monk prayed the Jesus prayer thousands of times until the prayer prayed itself. The Sufi whirled in ecstatic dance until the dancer disappeared and only the dance remained. Different practices, same destination: the dissolution of the false self and the awakening of the true self. And here's what's waiting on the other side of that awakening: not certainty about religious doctrines, but compassion for all beings. Because when you recognize the divine within yourself, you can't help but recognize it in everyone else. The homeless person, the enemy, the stranger, the one who hurt you. Even those who deny the sacred, they're still carrying it. They just haven't awakened to it yet. That's why this secret was always meant to be whispered, not shouted. Not because it's fragile, but because it's explosive. It dissolves boundaries. It ends holy wars. It makes every human encounter a meeting of the divine with itself. It transforms strangers into mirrors, enemies into teachers, suffering into doorways. The Abrahamic faiths preserved this truth in their mystical streams for one reason: so it would survive until someone like you is ready to hear it, ready to practice it, ready to become it. Write "awaken" below if you're ready for this journey. Like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone searching. Because this truth isn't meant to be hidden anymore. It's meant to be lived.